Amanda, thanks for being willing to have this conversation with me about your family's experience of participating in Dougie Center's Pathways program, our group for families who are facing an advanced serious illness.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
What initially brought you and your family to Dougie Center?
My husband, Todd, was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is grade 4 brain cancer, terminal illness. So I was completely overwhelmed by that diagnosis. We all were. I had a 6-year-old child at the time, Hazel, and knowing how to navigate that and manage that was, overwhelming. And I happened to be at my yearly exam in my OBGYN, and she mentioned the Pathways group as her partner had suffered from terminal cancer. And she had benefited greatly with her kids and her partner at the Pathways group. And I didn't have any idea that anything like that existed. And it sounded like exactly something for our family to participate in. And so, yeah, I immediately got online, started doing the research, broached it with Todd, and was really interested in participating.
So you had the benefit of a real personal recommendation from someone who had actually gone to the program.
Yeah, she was emphatic that you have to get it. This program helped her so much. And she was like, get in there as soon as you can. It's so helpful. So, yeah, I was having that just firsthand recommendation was really helpful. Yeah.
Could you share about any hesitations that you or Todd or even Hazel had about attending the Pathways group?
Yeah, Todd was very hesitant. I was gung ho. I needed the support, the resources. I was like, it was something I was looking for that I didn't even know I was looking for. And then when my OB mentioned it, I was like, yes, that is what I want. And so when I brought it up with Todd, he was very hesitant about it. He was always like, I want to focus on living, not dying. He would say that frequently. And I totally understood that. His illness took up so much of our time and energy. And I think he just wanted to live more of a normal life when he wasn't treated or when he wasn't at a doctor's appointment or when we weren't talking about his illness. So adding a whole another thing in the mix having to do with his illness was not something he wanted to do. And I think there's this hesitancy also, this kind of misconception that, like, oh, if I'm attending a group at a grief center, I'm giving up. And so I'm acknowledging that I'm dying. And so I think there was some of that also in the mix. Whereas was my dad died when I was a teenager, so I really wished that we had been able to talk about his illness, and he also had cancer, and talk about it as a family, process it as a family, and have a support network for that. And so I felt it was important to get in there and start talking about it, especially with a young child who we didn't know how to talk about it with. So I felt like I needed that support. So yeah, he was very hesitant. So it started out just being Hazel and I going to the group. But what ended up happening was that she was definitely not hesitant. She was really excited. Any child that goes and tours the Dougie Center is super stoked to go back because it's such a magical place. So she and I started attending, and then what happened is that she would come home and talk about it and how amazing it was. So I think there were like maybe one or two groups that just she and I attended. And then he was hearing about it from her and realizing, like, oh, it is important for me to attend. And she would actually say, Dad, the other kid's sick parent is there, you should come, and really encouraging him to come. And so that was really helpful at getting him to go. And so then he finally was like, okay, I'm ready to participate, and saw the value in the group.
So it seems important to highlight that as if another family is wondering, like, is Pathways the right space for me? A family can come with a child who has a parent or a caregiver with an advanced serious illness, the caregiver adult can come, but the person with the illness does not need to attend. It's an
Right.
opportunity, but they don't have to. Uh,
Right. Yes.
and it
And
sounds like Hazel also was an amazing salesperson to Todd of
he
getting him to
was.
come to the group.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that, yeah, that's such a benefit because we still were able to have those conversations and the benefit was still happening even though he wasn't able to participate. And I think, when the person who is sick isn't feeling well, that person can't always attend, but there's still a benefit to going with or without that person.
That the whole family system can benefit, even if the person with the illness isn't present physically for the group.
Correct. Yes.
Did Todd share with you any benefit he ended up getting from actually physically attending the group?
Yes. I think the benefit for him, like I said earlier, he was hesitant because he didn't want to spend the time doing this, the valuable family time doing this. But what ended up happening is I think it brought our family closer in terms of being able to process this together. And I think he really realized that benefit, in particular, towards the end of his illness. He and Hazel talked about his celebration of life and they planned it together. And I don't think that would have happened without the Dougie Center kind of prompting these difficult conversations and helping him to learn how to have the vocabulary and the confidence and the ease and comfort in talking about his illness with his young daughter, which I think he was so worried about. And this release eased that worry. And so he could be more open and direct with not only me, but with Hazel and all three of us together and feeling more comfortable talking about it. And then seeing the benefits, like Hazel being able to be excited to help plan his celebration of life, which, oh my gosh, what a tough conversation. But it turned out to be so beautiful and amazing and such a healthy way of both of them coping with this, incredibly tough situation, and really bonding over that and planning like, oh, we're going to have an ice cream sundae bar and a Bloody Mary bar for the, adults, and all this excitement surrounding that was really beautiful. And so Todd definitely realized the benefit of that. And then, yeah, just being together and doing this activity together that is positive surrounding his illness. And then I think also just his connections with other people who were going through the same illness and the same type of illness was very helpful to him. There were a number of situations where there were groups of people suffering from similar illnesses that would share resources and tips. And, navigating the healthcare system is not easy. And I can say this from the caregiver perspective as well, and from Todd's perspective as the ill person, having other people that are going through that difficulty, whether it's the healthcare system, insurance, the treatments, clinical trials, all of that is like nobody else is dealing with that. And so having another group of people that are and exchanging information and sharing tips. There was a group, I think they might have been all suffering from colon cancer. And one of the women had had a very successful treatment, a successful clinical trial. And so they were sharing that information and some of the other people were signing up for it. And, there's so many unknowns. And so having other people who are also bringing more information and searching out these different resources is so helpful.
How about for you, Amanda? I mean, I think in a family that is facing an advanced serious illness, so much energy goes to the person who has the illness. A lot of energy goes and focuses on children or teens that are part of the family. And then there's the caregiving adult who is both parenting and caring for their spouse or their partner and trying to care for themselves at, the four
Mhm.
seconds they have available in the day. What directly benefited you from participating in Pathways?
I think in like normal everyday life as the caregiver, you're the one holding it all together. Like you just mentioned, you're the parent, you're going to work, you're the caregiver, you're trying to now your person is sick, so you're trying to navigate everything else, all the other household tasks, as well as, like I said, all of the medical stuff and the healthcare system. And so you have to keep it together because you're that person. And so I feel like being able to go somewhere and kind of let down with other people was so helpful, especially because you're in this bizarre, surreal, like place of uncertainty, where you your whole life has been, it's a complete upheaval of your whole life, and you've had to completely pivot. You have no idea what's going to happen, when this person's going to die, when symptoms are going to start happening. And so talking about that with other people who are going through the exact same thing, because you're not having that experience at school pickup or at work or every day, people are kind of tiptoeing around you, or you're getting pity or whatever. I mean, everybody's trying their best, but they don't understand. And you also are in this place where you're having to hold it together. And then you can go somewhere where you can just be vulnerable and everybody gets it. Nobody's judging. It's a safe, comforting place. So I think for the caregiver, and I witnessed this with other caregivers in the group, people just being able just to completely lose it or not, but and I think that's so healthy to have that opportunity.
The invitation is there to lose it if needed, with a lot of guardrails around you in terms of having some certainty of how other people are going to respond to your expression in a way that when you're out and about in the world, you have a
Yeah,
sense of how they might respond, but it's not always the most like helpful or supportive thing in the moment.
right, right. Yeah, and I remember Todd was having all these symptoms, like these horrible seizures and personality change, all this stuff. And there happened to be another person in there whose partner was suffering from glioblastoma and experiencing similar symptoms. And just to hear, of course, I would never want anybody to go through that, but just to hear somebody else going through this just like gave me such relief and release of like, oh my God, that's happening to me too. And, I see that as a volunteer at the Dougie Center now. I see that with the kid in the kids groups of them. They go in like this, like me too, me too. And there's such healing and relief in that to be around people who are experiencing this really hard, challenging, and unusual circumstance that nobody in your life around you is experiencing, especially because a lot of times it's this out of order, your person is not elderly or younger. A lot of it's a younger person, so you have a young family or whatever. It's like nobody around you, they're going on their family vacations and just leading these, yay, what you perceive seems like amazing, normal lives. And you're like, oh my God, everything is crumbling in front of me. And so to be in a room with everybody else that is happening to is very, very supportive and healing.
Now, I know at Dougie Center we have a really strong confidentiality rule. So oftentimes adults are not aware necessarily the details of what their kids are doing or saying in the
Sure.
Pathways group. But what was your sense? You spoke to this a little, but what was your sense of like what Hazel, your daughter, got out of being in the group and how that shifted things for your whole family with her getting support?
Well, I think because the way the Dougie Center groups are structured, of the opening circle, where there is an opportunity to share your story or not share your story. And then also, there's an activity that's centered around, grief or anticipatory grief in this case, or some, terminal illness. And then the playtime, where they can have an opportunity just to be wild and free, and then a closing circle. And they're just through osmosis, they're getting so much out of it that Hazel would not directly come and say, oh, I did this specific activity, but she would just ask certain questions about, it's like repeat, something that she had heard, or maybe something about, asking about, oh, what's going to happen when dad, I could tell it was, vocabulary or, something that she had heard at the Dougie Center in group that was coming through, but it really instigated and kickstarted these really tough conversations a lot of times. But it was always such like just a casual question, of what's going to happen after dad dies, or, you know, and so we were doing this group of about making memories or whatever, or, we were doing this activity about making memories. And then she would say, we should make a memory. Let's do this, and have these ideas about what we should do. And then it would just kick off these really hard conversations that we could have in a very natural, authentic way. So yeah, it was very helpful in that regard.
This is another kind of layer of that question, but were there ways in which being part of the group, both for you and for Todd, helped you find the words or the language to talk with your daughter as maybe his illness progressed or as, the end of life was coming closer? Were there ways that you found the words to talk with her?
Yeah, for sure. As I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned earlier, my dad had died when I was a teenager of cancer. And at that point in time in my life, nobody was talking about death and dying. And I really wanted to have conversations with my dad and understand how he was feeling. I wanted to process it with my family, which I was unable to do. So I was determined with Hazel to start early on talking about death and dying before even Todd got sick. And that was really important to me to try to normalize death and dying. And so the Dougie Center, when Todd got sick and going to this group, this helped facilitated the process of normalizing death and dying, which I think is so helpful to feel open about, giving her the permission to be completely open and honest about all the feelings surrounding, death, dying, grief. It was so helpful because I wished that I had had that. And so Todd and Hazel were able to, and myself, all three of us were able to talk about it together and process together. And the Dougie Center helped, yeah, give us sort of the vocabulary, as I mentioned, Hazel, I think, kickstarted a lot of those conversations. So just after group, a lot of times driving home in the car. And it didn't have to be this dramatic conversation. It was just little pieces here and there that sort of helped just kind of normalize our situation and what was happening. And so she felt more comfortable that when he did start dying and then eventually did die, I think it was so much healthier for her because she could talk about it openly and process it normally and realize that this is a normal process.
It seems too that it's less about the specific words and finding the right words and about creating an atmosphere and an environment that's really open and normalizing of it just being a day-to-day conversation and not just one big conversation that we carve out this
Right.
time and we light some candles and we say the perfect words. It's like we're just driving to pick up some dinner after group. And well, actually, you're not because Pathways gives you dinner, but
Right.
we're driving to school the next day and like a little conversation happens. And that makes all
Sure.
the difference.
Yeah, it was just making it a part of our life. Like, this is part of our life. This is happening. We're not pretending like it's not. We're not, trying to pretend like we're living in this normal life. This is happening. And it's like a consistent conversation and ongoing, I guess, comfort and openness that happened for us as a result, I think, of going to the Pathways group.
One of the things I know families really grapple with is when first, do I join? And then when do I join? Do I wait
Mhm.
until the person who has the illness, their illness has progressed quite far? Do we join early? Like what do you have to say about that of the timing of when to join?
Sooner rather than later. I mean, if we could have joined sooner, I would. You know, I think it's hard. Again, I know there are so many challenges with time, energy. Even just as I mentioned earlier, this perception that it's like, giving up, or I'm going to wait till my person is in hospice, or till I have been told by a doctor that my death is inevitable. But I think the sooner the better, because once you get to hospice, it's too late. There's just not the time or energy to attend the group. Um, so I would recommend sooner rather than later. There was a family when I was there that had been there for quite some time. So I feel like a lot of these families can be there for years and years and years sometimes. So it's living with this illness, no matter how long it is. I think attending the group as early on as possible is very helpful.
On the opposite end of the beginning of the group, there's the ending of the group
Mhm.
for participants, and that is usually when their person has died. What was your experience of closing from your Pathways group?
I think for me, I honestly didn't really have a formal opportunity to close because when all of a sudden your person is dying, obviously the ball starts rolling, and so much time and energy is focused on that. You kind of forget all about everything else. So I didn't really formally close from the Pathways group, but I think what happened is I then rolled into a bereavement group right after that, and so that didn't really feel like I necessarily closed. I feel like I just moved to the next phase of the process at that point. Processing the death and the bereavement group, which is equally important and amazing. Um, but yeah, I did keep in contact with some of the people from the Pathways group and have seen them out and about. And so it was great to continue that relationship, but I didn't have an opportunity to formally close from the Pathways group because, yeah, everything just starts happening.
Is there anything else that you think families who are considering joining the Pathways group, grappling with whether they should join the Pathways group, anything else you think would be helpful for them to know?
I think I've covered most everything, but I think, as I mentioned, the normalization of death and dying, the ability to just examine it, feel it with your family, with your kid. And, I mean, it's, it sucks. It's a horrible thing to go through, but at the same time, when you can process it together, there can be some really beautiful moments. And I feel like it really helped us all to cope and be more, and Hazel to ultimately be more resilient, and all of us to be kind of less fearful. I think Todd was so scared about what would happen, to Hazel when he died and how she would feel and how she would grieve. And I think being able to process it together, in which Pathways really facilitated, really helped to mitigate a lot of that fear for him and for her. Um, and there are so many practical reasons for attending, just in terms of, like I mentioned, the sharing of resources and is so huge. And talking about, disability resources. I mean, there's like everything that you're going through and all these things that kind of come up. Oh, handicap parking. I mean, like things you don't even think of that always come up with your peers that you're like, oh my gosh, wow, I need to look into that, or ways that you can help others cope with their situation, I think is really fantastic. And then dinner, you get dinner after you're done. So it's like just checks one more box off your list. You're just like long, long, long list of things. You can all have dinner and the socialize with your peers, which I think is helpful for like even the whole families to connect together after the group. So, the kids and the parents are all together. And I think that really is helpful. Many friendships, I formed many friendships from that. Again, so helpful to have people who are going through the same thing and be able to trade information even outside of the Dougy Center.
Well, Amanda, thank you for sharing so much about your family's experience with the Pathways group, for being such an advocate for families getting support sooner rather than later when they're facing an advanced serious illness, and for really giving some, window into what an experience of being part of a group like that can be. So, thank you for your time today.
Of course, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. And I wholeheartedly support the Pathways group and encourage everyone and anyone who's going through something like this to give it a shot.